And because I'm really curious about the solution now.
Okay,
Can we go there now?
let's talk about one of the solutions that I see. And the same thing a lot of people do, right? Say, the karma of the planet is the karma of the planet. The karma of the country is the karma of the country. Are we here to change the world? Somewhat, but not really. And it's the cliche, right? That we're here to change ourselves. We're here to work on ourselves. We'll work on our shadow. So it is so when they asked Jordan Peterson, like, what do we do about liberals or conservatives or like extreme right, extreme left? He's like, man, if you really want to help yourself, if you really want to help the world, really help yourself, because you are the core of the world. By you working on yourself, by you willingly looking at your own shadow, by you looking at your own your superego, that's the way you're going to help the world, by really being the hero of your own journey. Not just a reluctant hero, but taking the sword and going to the shadow, meeting the dragon, appeasing the dragon. That's how we can help fix the world, but really fixing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because Peterson is like a mythologist. He's like he's a storyteller, psychological storyteller. And this is one of the things he tells people. And by the way, he has I'm not sure about the numbers, but I know that a lot of men are really drawn to his material, which I read in the New York Times. I actually didn't read the article, but there was an article in the New York Times that was like, Peterson is the man, like the new face of patriarchy or something. Because he's like, because he is appealing to white, cisgendered, hetero men who, by kind of Marxist oppressor standards right now, are the oppressors. But really, I think these people are really lost.
Yeah.
They're lost because no one's giving them away. And then Peterson is saying, like, well, improve yourself. Follow your gifts and give them to the world, and clean up your act, basically. Tell the truth. One of his main axioms in his book. And I can see why young men are really attracted to this. And I can see that it would be really helpful also.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like tell me.
I was going to say what that information does also, which makes this New York Times article even more detrimental, is it actually de-radicalizes these men and boys who are feeling really marginalized, like the incels, or, these people who could probably, in their confusion, very easily become radicalized as white supremacists or misogynists or radical people. And he's taking them and bringing them a bit more to the center, which is a really, really good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Because as he says, even with Marxism or with this, whenever we have someone who is not following their gifts, the whole world loses. Because if these people who call themselves incels, they have gifts and they have something to do the world, but they themselves believe in their own. I mean, of course, they're suppressed because we're all oppressed in a certain way, but they're believing their oppression as their own thing. They are not helping anyone. So we're all losing by them considering themselves as losers.
You said something interesting. You said we're all oppressed, by the way. How do you think we're all oppressed?
Well, I think, again, with Marxists, he's right in that there is oppression. Absolutely, there's always oppression. But that's just one of the things that it touches us all. Just kind of, not just Buddhism, but religions in general, talk about life is suffering. Life is uncomfortable. Life is not perfect. If I want to have something right now, I am, depending on the level of money and energy I have, I cannot have it. So if I want to have a brand new car right now, it's like, well, I don't, even though I really want it, it's like, it's not the best thing to buy a new car right now. So there's internal oppression and there's external oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So oppression exists, absolutely. But when people marry their own identity to oppression, that's when problems can arise.
And you know, what's interesting about what you just said too, and I think what the argument is with that is that it is kind of, oppression could seem kind of relative. Like you not being able to go out and buy a car, for example, like that might be your external oppression at the moment. But while a Black man in Southern United States is going to be scared to get on the highway and get pulled over because, you know, if he encounters a cop, then he's like 10 times more likely to go to jail, you know, like, so oppression can kind of be
there's
seen
a
as
spectrum
relative.
of oppression for sure. There's a spectrum of oppression and people being more oppressed than others.
So what would you say to someone, because I also agree with you that like marrying your identity to your oppression is rarely if never a good outcome, right? Like I am this oppressed person.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of destruction possible in that kind of identity, adopting that kind of identity. So what would you say to somebody who's like, well, of course you are not going to marry to your, you know, you have more freedom to have distance from what oppresses you because what oppresses you isn't actually all that bad. But what about somebody whose oppression is like in their face day to day? What would you say to somebody like that?
I would say how just by the mere fact of living in a developed world, that person is way more likely to be much more privileged than a person in an underdeveloped world or the developing world. For instance, if you're poor in the US or if you're poor in Canada, then there's governmental aid and you can access to. So they won't let you die. So especially here in Canada, if you're poor, there's lots of all of these governmental programs that can help you. But for instance, in another country, which is not as poor, but a developing country like Mexico, where if you're poor, like the government doesn't care, you die, or either you die or you can become a criminal or have really just surviving. So you're just surviving. So that is much more oppression than what happens in the developed world. And if we go to the underdeveloped world, where just a couple of months ago, women were not able to, in Saudi Arabia, they were not able to drive a car. Yeah, so that's real oppression. So I think what Jordan Peterson talks about, and a lot of people from the West, is like people who are complaining in Harvard about being oppressed. I was like, guys, even if you're Black in Harvard, you're part of you're not just part of the 1%, you're part of the 0.0001% of everyone has ever lived in life. So it's kind of childish. I see it. And if there is some legitimate oppression, then there is things that we should be looking at, but again, without marrying it with it. Because again, being gay in California, which they may also feel somehow oppressed, it's very different from being gay in Saudi Arabia.
Right. Right, of course. Of course. So there's a spectrum of oppression.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
because the thing is that even in university, because I mean, I've just graduated, people will tell me, professors, or like when I took gender studies classes, the professors were trying to convince us that we were oppressed, and because I'm an immigrant, that I was even more oppressed than the rest. It's kind of, they wouldn't say it to me like with their words, but they were like, Marco, you are oppressed. Don't you feel horrible about it?
Did
It's like,
professors actually say that to you?
not like that, but they made us take like this, what is it, implicit bias training, which is pretty much telling you, is showing you how racist or not racist you are, how much you've been oppressed, and you come with your conclusions. But the narrative was something like that of, yeah, you are oppressed and it's horrible. And who is oppressing you? Canadian culture is oppressing you, and Anglo-Saxon culture is oppressing you. Men are oppressing you. So I started to develop for a couple of days. It's like, like this anger towards Anglo-Saxon white men, like, and then it wasn't, I mean, I think, which is good to think about and see how maybe I've been discriminated or not for maybe a couple of hours, or with friends or in therapy, but not as a flag, because I would not expect that me coming to Canada, all of a sudden, the majority of movies I was going to see in the movie theater will be Mexican or in Spanish, or there will be Mexican restaurants everywhere. And it's like, it's just me denying how grateful I should be of this country, open its doors to me, and I was able to migrate. And then how ungrateful would it be for me to be like, oh, I feel oppressed because people are not speaking Spanish, and it's horrible because there's no tacos everywhere. It's like, dude.
Yeah, so there is bias, but a thing you point out, which I think is also true, is that for as much as there's oppression in every culture, there's oppression in every culture, because culture by definition is going to preference whoever is the majority. Like, that's what culture is.
Yeah, which makes sense.
And there are going to be people who are oppressed. And like you said, it's valid to contemplate those things. It's like to talk about them, to understand them, but to have a lack of gratitude for the culture itself too. Like I watched this crazy movie a couple days ago called Hostiles, which was about, it was like a Western movie about life not that long ago, like late 19th century, I suppose, like somewhere in Wisconsin, or I don't know, mid America somewhere. And the level of chaos and the level of unsafety and the level of just like terror that people were in every single day. Like, if you were a woman on your own, you're a walking target, you know? And this was only 150 years ago. In the spectrum of evolution, this is a fraction, a very, very, very small amount of time, 100 years ago. And culture, like, for better or worse, with all of its negative and positive attributes, has brought us a really long way in 150 years. Like, that's what I kept thinking as I watched this movie. Like, oh my God, we've come so far. We've come so far. And even like as a woman, comparing myself to a woman in Saudi Arabia, or comparing myself to a woman in Turkey, which as a place I lived in for a few years, the benefits of this culture, which are very rarely talked about, are there. They're there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, it's a miracle. And that's looking at our own countries 100 years ago. There was this, it's a book. Peterson was talking about a book called Infidel or something like that, which it just speaks to me. I think it's either a woman who was Muslim, or it's still Muslim but lives in the West. She was living in the Netherlands, and whenever she would go, because they're even more precise than here in Canada, right? So she would go to the bus stop, and there will be a timer, telling her exactly how many seconds the bus would be there.
Mm-hmm.
And she would just could not believe it. Like she would go there every day and like look at the timer, waiting for the bus. It's like, how is this even happening? How, like everything that will have to happen for buses to be here on the second, which is you and I like going to India. For some weird reason, in India, there is this one train that has been late for like 47 years. It's in the Guinness World Record. Now, and people are like, yeah, it's been late. And no one says anything. It's like, yeah, your train will be late for a couple of hours, but it's been late for 40 years and no one has changed it. So for her, it was like, wow, like this is just marvelous.
Yeah.
It's like having a conversation like we having here right now through Zoom, that requires internet, requires our computer, requires quantum physics to make it work. It's just miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
And
that requires also that we've been able to understand these pretty sophisticated and complex concepts, right? Me as a woman, you as a Mexican speaking a second language in a country that's not your native country.
Yeah, which is fantastic. If we talked about this like even 30 years ago, that we will having this conversation, be like, no, you're not. Like,
yeah,
come on, Marco. It's like, there was not even a concept of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, totally.
Which I think is magical.
And another thing that I find really problematic, which Peterson kind of addresses, is that this whole Marxist scheme of oppressor and the oppressed, I don't really see what, as people are putting this idea forward more so and more so, like in my world, I see it a lot in a lot of feminists coming out and coming forth, and then a lot of intersectional feminists coming forth. I don't see what the solution is or what they're vying for necessarily. It feels like there's a lot of information being put out. You know, people have like a microphone or a megaphone, and they're saying things about being oppressed or about being an oppressed culture, which some of it being valid and some of it maybe being less valid than other stuff. But I always think, like, to what end? Like, okay, we're raising awareness, which is often, by the way, kind of an angry and defensive point of view. So, but we're raising awareness, so that's a good thing. But the only solutions that, from this kind of Marxist perspective, hypothetically, would be like either for the script to be flipped, right? So the oppressed now become the oppressor, which we're kind of seeing. I told you about, this is just a kind of an offside example, but Danielle Laporte last week having this huge, massive wave of criticism and her program being called out as being racist and her images were racist. And while that may or may not have been true, I don't feel like I have an opinion on the matter. It was clear that it wasn't just a matter of like, okay, Danielle, here's information, here's why you're wrong. There was quite a bit of vitriol and
so what happened?
So what happened was she put out a program, and some of the images were offensive to the Black community, to women of color, because there was one picture of a Black man in one of her ads, and then there was another picture that was like all of these limbs put together, like a white limb and a brown limb, and I think some were even like purple and pink. And then the criticism was that it was racist. Like, these are our bodies. Women of color were saying, like, this is my colored body. Who are you to use this? Which I can understand that there could be some anger, and absolutely there's an opportunity for a conversation to arise because of that. Like, okay, where's the anger, and where was Danielle's blind spot, and how could she have done it better, and what didn't she learn before putting that out that she probably should have? but did she deserve to be like called horrible names and be called out and be called a racist bitch, which is what I was reading on the forums? Like, that to me seems like the script is just being flipped. And is that doing us any good? So that's one potential outcome. And then the other potential outcome is what Peterson talks about as equality of outcome. Right? So that would be like a crux of the Marxist argument that everyone, no matter ability, no matter their race, their gender, their able-bodied status, should receive the exact same. And Peterson, so that being a hypothetical outcome to all of these oppressed politics, Peterson is like waving his hands up and being like, that's not a valid outcome. We've seen that and it doesn't work. So that was a bit of a rant that I just went on, but the point being, like, what is the end?
What is the solution? Yes.
Exactly.
That they propose. Either just reimbursing everything and the oppressors become the oppressed, or what? Exactly.
Or you make everybody have the exact same and you find some way to measure it, which is basically the essence of communism. And one of the most violent regimes of the 20th century.
Yeah, that would be something interesting to look at for sure. What are their solutions? Because it seems there's not a lot of solutions, or the solution would be like equity. Equity is a solution. I was like, wait a minute, not really. Because it sounds nice. I think this is one of the things I wanted to come back to. I don't know if we talked about it last time, but if, let's say I'm in Mexico, in my country, in my home country, and then the first time I see real misery, like really extreme poverty, then I will be like that's horrible. Like, how can this be happening? How can this be happening? The problem is that Marxism comes in and says, like, I have a solution. Let's take money from the rich and give it to the poor. And then it's like, what about the common wisdom of not give fish to people but teach them how to fish? It's like, no, that doesn't work. Take fish from the people who already know how to fish, give it to the people without fish. But those people are never going to learn to fish. It's like, oh, don't think that far. Let's just keep the fish.
So it's kind of this Robin Hood mentality.
Which it can be beautiful in theory, but not if you stay with the thought a couple more seconds. When
you follow it down the line, it's actually a pretty immature solution.
Yeah, like this Gloria Alvarez, who says that like it's a marvelous sentiment, but it's kind of an adolescent sentiment, Marxism. Yes, so we're saying Marxism, it's a great idea. It's a really beautiful sentiment, but it's kind of an adolescent sentiment. Which is, it doesn't really work.
And my question about that also is, because the connection really didn't become clear to me for a while between like feminism and Marxism. I didn't really see the connection in any way. In a similar kind of vein, for a long time, I looked at feminism and thought it was a really beautiful sentiment. I'm a woman. I work to empower women. That's my whole why for everything that I do. So of course I'm a feminist. And then doing a little bit more digging and looking at some of the nuances and parsing apart some of the aspects that don't really have coherence or make sense, I have to say, like, I think I'm looking for a new word for myself, like maybe a humanist or something. Yeah. So my question is, like, do you think people who are like, you know, feminists or intersectional feminists or activists, social justice warriors, do you think they're making the connection between what they're doing and Marxism? Like, do you think that's clear?
Hello my dear friends, thank you so much for watching this video. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comment section below, and make sure to like this video, share it if you think anyone can benefit from it, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't, so we can keep you updated on more awesome videos on yoga, mindfulness, spirituality, psychology, etc. Thank you so much.